So to me, and I've experienced it when, for instance, in the slaughter classes, when we're killing sheep, as soon as you get them down on the ground, they relax and they don't usually fight. Some do, but they don't usually fight. And there's just something that happens where they release, and that it probably comes from that when the wolves come to kill them.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin, and I'm back with more skills and stories from the wild. Now, I probably need to apologize. Early on, you might be able to hear I've got a little bit of a sniffle. As a reason for that, I was earned working hard up in the mountains at 11,000 feet. I'm currently up in Colorado, chasing giant beasties with friends with our bows. Happy to report we already have a successful hunt in the books. On day one, I went out with Michael from Hunting Stories podcast, from the Hunting Stories podcast, I should say, and a couple of his buddies. And yeah, he managed to make a perfect shot on a moose cow, which was pretty epic to see. So congratulations to him. It was a pretty heavy pack out, but great fun, and yeah, not really hard work when you got success in the books already. There's a full story, I should say, coming soon. We're going to record an episode, and that'll be out so you can hear how the whole thing went down. So, in today's episode, we have a wonderful guest. Her name is Harmony Cronin. Now, Harmony is not really someone that you can easily pigeonhole. It's actually something that we talk about in the episode. So I guess what I'll probably do is let her do the talking. We kind of figure it out together. Suffice to say, she is someone who flies in the face of convention. She has a deep and unique connection with the natural world. So I'm excited for you to hear this one. I should probably just say as well, if you're new to the podcast, then welcome. It would be super helpful if you could leave a positive review and subscribe. That means that you will always be up to date with the new episodes that come through. If you are an old timer and you're enjoying the content, then by all means, feel free to chuck in a good review. It always helps get this thing in front of as many eyeballs, or I should say ear holes, as possible. Right, okay, it's definitely time for me to stop waffling. Here's Harmony.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch!
Hi, Harmony.
Hey!
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for jumping in. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
So, through our previous conversation and a bit of research that I did beforehand, listening to podcasts and looking on your website and various different spots, it became clear that it's very hard to put you in a pigeonhole. It's hard to determine exactly who you are and what you're all about. So you've got such an interesting story. I guess maybe I should leave the task to you, if you wouldn't mind setting up in a kind of like a nutshell what you're about, because there's so many different areas of things that you explore and have like ideas and passion about.
Oh man. Yeah, it's hard for me to pigeonhole myself too. I guess, I grew up in a city in downtown Denver, in Colorado, and something just wasn't quite right. And when I was younger, I always say punk rock saved my life.
Yeah.
And I started listening to punk music, and it kind of opened my mind to alternative pathways.
Okay.
And kind of media literacy and questioning the government and all those kinds of things. And it led me down this path of exploration. And I traveled for a long time in cities and hopping trains and hitchhiking and just trying to find something. I didn't even know what I was looking for. And then through that exploration and finding the slip space, I just more and more, I realized I was tracking what it means to be a human.
Yeah.
And a human in these times, and the things that I didn't know I was missing, which are, being outside barefoot, hunting and gathering, making baskets, tending to the earth in front of me because I was in such city life for so long. And so I would say that a lot of my path has been finding my way, being like a city kid, a city punk, finding my way back towards a life way, or towards, maybe not back towards, right? Because I didn't come from it, but towards a life way that felt so healing and nourishing and full of the, it's like the threads, all of the various threads of what make a human a human.
Yes. I've got so many questions already.
Nice.
Okay, so I feel like this journey that you said you've been on, I feel like I am much further behind, but I have also begun that journey a little myself, like moving in closer to the natural world and connecting more and more with the natural world. But that's brought you to and forgive me if I'm using incorrect terms, but sort of ancestral living, traditional animal processing techniques, honoring those techniques that have been used for many century, possibly millennia before us. I guess we don't know. Maybe you do because you've done more research than I have. So that's brought you to that amazing place. You mentioned something, you used the term slip space. What does that mean?
Oh, I love this term. So when I was traveling and hitchhiking and hopping trains, you have to find places where you can be without money, right? A lot of the infrastructure of civilization is based on paying to be in a spot, even in a coffee shop, right? You buy a cup of coffee. Slip space to me is finding the cracks in all of it where you can exist without having to pay for existing there. So for instance, an alleyway, sitting down and eating in an alleyway, or finding a place under a bridge to sleep, or the abandoned field next to the warehouse district where you can set up a little tent, like that sort of slip space. And to me, it's like the cracks of the empire or of cities, of the kind of experiment of this lifestyle, I think is where the wild is coming back. That's like kind of how I've come to understand it, as slip spaces where the wild is literally coming up through the cement again. And it's usually abandoned. It's usually disregarded and neglected by people within that lifestyle.
I'm curious, have you found, because there's a lot of, it's funny, I guess in a previous interview I did with a guy actually in Australia, he used this term, and it's not exactly the same, but he said the normies, people who are normal. I guess my question is, then do you find the normies, or people who are more used to the conventional, not slip space environment, if they see other people who are in that situation, or who are optimizing their life to be in that wilder space between kind of your term, like the empire convention, have you found that has created kind of strong emotional responses or that,
yeah,
I guess that's a pointed question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was kind of a superpower to be in slip space, because as soon as, for instance, when you sit down on a sidewalk, it's taboo in our culture to sit down on a sidewalk. Only, right, homeless people or drug addicts or these people in slip space sit down on sidewalks. So when you sit down on a sidewalk, you really do enter this different relationship with people walking by. And I mean, I've been spit on,
Really?
I've been like, cussed at. And I was never a drug addict, and I'm well spoken, and usually my backpack is full of books. And so I feel like just by virtue of literally changing my body position in public, right, people can view you so differently. But it is a superpower too, because as a single woman traveling around, I would be able to set out my sleeping bag and my bedroll kind of by the train track somewhere, and as long as my face was hidden, people won't mess with you because they're actually afraid of you.
Yes.
Because if you're not participating in their stream of consciousness, you're a threat somehow.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually experienced that myself a little. The fact that just changing how you're behaving compared to convention can really change people's perception of you. I mean, so my wife and I lived in a very small travel trailer for about 18 months. A time that I really hold close to my heart, actually, because it was a point where, I mean, I'm originally from England and my wife is from South Africa. And we didn't have a green card at that point, and we were waiting. Our green card was going to be coming in so we could have more security in the US. But there was this strange moment where I actually lost my job, and we weren't allowed to leave the country and we weren't allowed to work. So then we were like, okay, well, we were kind of like forced to be in that space between, which was actually amazing because it made us experience how, yeah, we don't have to follow rules in a conventional way. So the number of times that we were doing our like yoga or exercises on a yoga mat in a parking lot, and the way that people are looking at you, you know, or just sitting on a curb and eating a banana, you know, you do get some immediate questionable, like, people, you see the look on people's faces. It's so interesting. Mm-hmm. And it makes you realize, doesn't it, how people are so used to normal, like there's a frame of what is normal and what is not normal, and how that could potentially be unsafe.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Anyway, we're already going off down down a big rabbit hole. But so I guess what I was going to say is, thank you for explaining the term slip space. I'm sure that will come up a lot more. But I guess one thing I was going to ask you is, currently you split your time in kind of two different places, if I'm correct in understanding. Predominantly you are in, is it Washington? And then also over in, and I never pronounce this state correctly, given my bad accent, it just always sounds terrible, Montana.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, good. So is that right?
Yeah, I'm mostly in Washington, and then a chunk of the year I do go to Montana.
Okay, fantastic. So we're gonna let's get deep into the Buffalo Bridge project, and I want to hear more about that, definitely, for sure. I guess the one thing that's exciting though is you told me that you're soon headed over there. Is that correct? And is that actually part of Buffalo Bridge, or is that a separate project?
No, I'm not. I'm headed to Idaho soon.
Oh, Idaho. Okay.
Yeah.
My mistake.
Mm-hmm. It's okay. So there's some tribal crossovers there. So we won't be going to Buffalo Bridge. Buffalo Bridge is a wintertime project.
Okay.
And usually, you know, we time it with the buffalo hunt, which, as it goes with hunting, it's when the animals move, which is usually February, March.
Yes. Yeah. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. So, so maybe could you tell me a little bit about the project that you're about to do, heading over to Idaho then?
Yeah. So years ago, we made friends with some of the people in the Nez Perce tribe, and we made really good connections there, and really we really connected over our shared skills as humans, primarily over animal processing and tanning hides and using as much of the animal as possible. And so we've had a really deep connection with one family in particular. And we have been working towards gathering up the old skills of how to make buffalo hide teepees. And with a lot of people involved and a lot of different folks carrying a lot of pieces of the puzzle. And so this year, my friends got accepted for a grant. They're tribal members of the Nez Perce tribe, and they got a grant to head up making one of the first brain tan buffalo hide teepees for the Nez Perce tribe. Wow. Since the Nez Perce Wars, which I think was almost 200 years ago. My understanding is that the U.S. government burned all of their teepees during that war, and they have not made any since then. And that knowledge was pretty intentionally destroyed as part of the cultural genocide that happened. And so I've been invited to go out and help support my friends in making this really amazing project, which will be a community teepee for the tribe. And it's so exciting. I'm like, this is like almost a decade in the making, and it's been a dream we've talked about, and we've been trying so hard to make it work. And it seems like it's finally all coming together this year.
Amazing. It seems like such a huge job as well. Obviously, with your skill set and the kind of community working together, you'll be able to, I guess, like fundamentally, it's like, how big is the process? Like, buffalo hide are huge on their own, but I'm guessing you're going to use a number of them in order to make make even just one. So how long is that process?
Oh man, hard to say at this point. We've allotted 6 to 8 weeks for just tanning the buffalo hides. So we have 20 buffalo hides to start with,
Wow.
and a full size teepee is going to be, depending on the size, maybe 18 of those, 14 to 18, depending. And so we have 20 just in case, because things happen and maybe we won't finish a couple of them or they won't be in good enough shape to use. So, I mean, just tanning one buffalo hide is probably, it takes almost a week of pretty much 9 to 5 all day, every day, pretty hard physical labor. And so it's an immense project. One teepee is, I mean, it's so much work and technical know-how and, knowing the problem solving, being able to, I think, see problems that could come down the line and how to mitigate those before you get them, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's huge. This is a huge project. So that's 8 weeks just for tanning the hides. And then we're going to have another chunk of time where the teepee is sewn and put together. And I honestly don't know how long that's going to take. I would say probably another 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so.
That's wild. I mean, I always imagined it was going to be a big job, but like, I didn't realize it would be that many buffalo hides. So you gave a bit of a nutshell of your story, but I would love to go into a little bit more detail if that's all right with you. So I'd love to go back to like where it all began, your experiences in the city, and then discovering your like, I guess, being drawn to the outdoors and the wild environments. And yeah, just tell me how you became you.
How did I become me? Man, I can't take credit for it. That's something I've been thinking a lot about, is looking back now, the only logical explanation is that I was claimed by my ancestors, by the animals, by the land I was living on. So I was growing, I grew up in, well, just north of Denver. And then once I found punk rock, spent a lot of time in downtown Denver and part of the music scene and the DIY scene. And so lots of warehouse venues and squatting in abandoned buildings and doing a lot of art and that kind of thing. And I started hitchhiking and hopping trains just to travel and kind of explore and travel from city to city. And being a punk, there was always an inn. There were always punk traveler houses that I could stay at. And
okay.
yeah, yep. And also sleeping by the train tracks and under the bridges and stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had friends all over the place that I could stay with, and lots of bands and touring bands, and always going to shows and stuff.
How old were you when you started traveling and kind of living this freer life?
I think like 16, 17 is when I first started hitchhiking.
Okay,
yeah,
pretty young.
16, 17. Yeah, pretty young, totally.
So what was family life like before that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it was a little rough and tumble. I have 9 siblings, and I'm almost at the end of that line. So honestly, I think by the time they got to me, our parents were pretty exhausted. And I mean, we were allowed a lot of space as kids and really encouraged to follow what we wanted to follow. And I would check in with my mom. She'd always be like, just give me a phone call. It was back when payphones were still a thing. So as long as I checked in with my mom, I mean, they were fine with it, and I was a smart kid. I had street smarts. Like, they trusted my ability to move in the world, which is such a blessing because it helped me so much having that sort of freedom.
And also I remember and this is, I guess, surprised me when I heard this in a previous interview that you were pretty shy as a kid. Is that right?
Oh yeah, cripplingly shy. Totally. Yeah, I could not even answer questions in school. Yeah, I couldn't order food at a restaurant. Yeah.
How? It's funny because I guess, was there a moment that changed? Right? Because you're clearly so bubbly and outgoing now. Maybe you've learned as you've become older or you become more comfortable. What do you think changed?
I think finding myself and finding my path, really sliding into my life's purpose, right? I feel so in line with what I think I was put on this planet to do. And so I feel like myself. I feel like I mean, what is there to
Yeah.
be shy about?
Yeah, yeah. I know that does make sense. It does make sense when you're comfortable in
Yeah.
who you are and what you're all about. Then that comes across
Yeah.
with in everything that you do, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you said that you were a big part of
Yeah.
the punk rock era. In my understanding, I guess like punk was about like messing with the system. Is that right? Like it's about like understanding convention and kind of like fighting against that. Is that kind of the ideals of punk rock? Like there's more than just music, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say so. And the bands that I listened to, the lyrics of the music really helped me understand critical thinking, for instance, and just questioning the dominant narrative and that sort of thing. And so I was really heavy into that when I was younger in cities because that's what felt good. And once I kind of awakened to the fact that industrialized civilization and like the empire doesn't work that well for the people involved and the beings that it enslaves essentially to keep us fed and clothed and keep everything lubricated. I was really angry, right? And punk was an answer to that. I was so angry because I didn't know how to live in a way that wasn't participating in the things that I was disagreeing with. So I didn't like war, for instance. I didn't like industrialized agriculture. I didn't like all these things, but I couldn't feed myself, clothe myself, or house myself without these things. And so I was just really
Mm.
angry. And that's why I think that was a huge part of propelling me along this path was that anger, and especially being a teenager and thinking I knew everything and wanting to figure out a way to save the world, and have everybody wake up. And so I just kept searching and searching, and this traveling that I did was really a part of that. And then I don't know exactly when it started to shift, but I do remember hitchhiking with my dog to a forest somewhere. It could have been somebody's private property because I didn't even know what national forest was at that point. And I just like walked into the forest and camped with my dog. And that was my one of my first initial tries at like being outdoorsy, and like didn't have enough food and didn't know anything, probably didn't have enough water, that sort of thing. I mean, I really was taking little baby steps towards it. And I knew that something existed in the forest, on the land, like in the meadows, in the plains. I knew something existed outside of the city that was really important to me and to my path, but I didn't know. And I didn't know really how to camp. And I didn't know a lot of these things, but I just kept trying. And I started hiking. I remember hitchhiking from Colorado to the Grand Tetons, which is by Yellowstone. When I was maybe 18 or 19, I hitchhiked up there and just walked into the national park and just tried to camp. And like it was a disaster, like had no supplies, didn't know how to make a fire, like tried to burn a book to start a fire, like that kind of thing. Just such a newbie, such a city kid. And I just kept trying because I knew it was when I was out there, I didn't feel the anger, I didn't feel the like rage against the things that I was seeing and that I was participating in. And there was something so healing in that. And the more I did that, and the more I realized, oh, well, if I can take care of my daily needs, like how can I feed myself without participating in industrialized slaughter, for instance, and industrialized agriculture? How can I mean, clothing came much later, but it really started with food, I think. And that's when I became vegan and didn't eat animals for a long time because I just didn't know how to not participate in the horrible things
Yeah.
that were happening.
So how long were you vegan for?
Oh gosh, years. Years. I would say off and on, maybe I want to say 6 years or
Okay.
something.
And was that at the same time
Yeah.
as being homeless, hopping on trains and traveling around a bunch, hitchhiking everywhere? Because I would imagine if you
Yeah.
are trying to like get food from opportunistic places, being a vegan would make that much harder as well. Because, if
Yeah.
you're, I don't want to be dramatic and say starving. I don't think that's the situation. But if you're in a situation where I guess it's what's the expression, beggars can't be choosers. You're making your life a bit
Right.
harder in that situation. So did you experience that? It was a bit harder to find food that you considered to be an ethical choice?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we were eating out of dumpsters a lot. And, I don't think that I had really hard line boundaries around dumpstered meat for, well, we weren't eating meat out of dumpsters, but like leftovers or something like that. I think I would eat leftovers that I found if it had meat in it because of that reason. I mean, I don't know how how boundaried I could have been, but whenever I
Yeah.
could afford food, yeah, I definitely wasn't buying food. And then once I slowed down on the train hopping and I lived in Olympia, Washington, and I got a house down there with a bunch of people, I didn't touch animal products at all. I was like, no way, I don't want anything to do with it. And it was in that house that I ended up breaking my veganism uh, by eating a rat, and then that started my whole path towards where I'm at
Okay,
now.
so wait. I'm going to have to stop you there for a second. That's not one that we're going to gloss over quickly. So please tell me the whole story of how you decided to eat a rat.
Yeah, so I was very vegan, and we were living in a house, me and I don't know, six or other people or so, a bunch of really wonderful women, and we had this really bad rat infestation. And they were eating all of our organic food, and these are big rats. I mean, rats in Olympia are huge. And so we didn't know what to do about it. And so we decided to set rat traps. And
Was that a big
the
choice?
first rat we
Was that,
killed,
sorry to interrupt. Was that a big choice for you? Because obviously, if
yeah,
you've made a whole choice about what you're eating, to then choose to like end lives, there's got to have been a moment as well.
yeah, we tried to get away with not killing them for a long time, and it was just a disaster. And they populated, I think they were building like the Great Pyramid of Giza in the walls at night. Like they were so loud. And so, right, we set some traps for them. And the first rat we killed, I remember being so wrecked actually by it. I was so wrecked seeing their little body there and how beautiful they were. And I remember sitting around and with my dear friend Sarah, and we were like, well, I mean, it was eating all of our organic food, and so it's kind of an organic rat, and like maybe we should eat it. And I remember thinking, oh, people used to use every part of an animal, right? Like that's like the fable that we were passed down, is like you should use every part of an animal, and I didn't even know what that meant. And so I decided that I was going to try, and so we skinned this rat, and then all the rats that we captured after that too, and we skinned them and then fried up their tiny little their tiny little rat legs, and like ate them like little like hams. And they were delicious, and we ate the hearts, and we didn't eat the guts, but we ate most of the organs and stuff. And it changed my life. I mean, that's how I broke my veganism, was eating that rat. And then we started eating all of the rats that we caught from then on. And so all the women in the house, and we started tanning their hides. So that's like the first hides that I ever tanned, using black tea to make them into leather. And so we kind of, all the women, we would catch these rats, skin them all, and it would take, I mean, an hour. We didn't know what we were doing just to skin a rat, right? Like we just like with little razor blades, having no idea, trying so hard to make such beautiful things. We make earrings out of the bones, and yeah, clean their little skulls and make hair clips or whatever. And that really opened up the door to then learning how to skin, gut, process, roadkill. And that's, I mean, I can say eating the rat really, I mean, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can pick up all this roadkill, and we can just, I don't have to kill anything. Um, and these animals are already being killed, and why not just honor their lives and their deaths by using as much as we can, and then we get to eat them too.
I'm curious then, eating roadkill, how was that as a process? I mean, you said it seems like it was quite a smooth step to do that. How long were you eating roadkill for? Was it just kind of opportunistic moments? You happened to be driving past or hitchhiking and see an animal and just quickly scoop it up. Did you learn like parameters about what's like acceptable amount of damage or what's not? I mean, it's like I imagine that was also a bit of a learning curve. The amount of time, judging the amount of time on the road.
Right. Yeah, what I just learned is that our noses really are the tool that we need. And so if okay, often a roadkill will be hit in such a way that the guts are kind of busted up in there,
Yeah, yeah.
which the guts can really smell. Even when you freshly kill an animal, you know, the guts can really smell. And so the technique that we came up with that is foolproof is we would maybe like cut off a leg, walk away from the animal, walk away from the guts that might be busted up in there, walk away and smell the meat. And if the meat smells like you want to eat it, then it's fine. If it smells like you don't want to eat it, then don't eat it. You know, we're animals. Like it's actually that simple. And I've never been sick from roadkill. But you know how many times I've gotten food poisoning from a restaurant?
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I guess there is a saying, isn't there? The nose knows.
That's right.
I think that's a confidence thing as well, right? Because I've definitely been in a few situations hunting myself where whatever, especially hunting season in California where it can be pretty warm because sometimes it's the middle of summer almost. So you shoot something out in the wilderness, then you have to transport back. There's always a bit of a moment where you're thinking, oh, was that a bit too long? Didn't have enough time to cool down.
Right.
But for sure, I think whatever insecurities I had early on, because I'm a bit of a late onset hunter myself, it's definitely true. You gain a confidence in your senses, don't you? Which is quite an amazing thing.
That's right. Yeah.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. There's a moment, and I don't know if this happened at this kind of time that you're talking, but you mentioned in another podcast when you were telling a story about your life that you actually found a dead squirrel, a roadkill squirrel, and it actually spoke to you.
Yeah.
And gave you a message, which I think was perhaps maybe the beginning of a I know this could be wrong, I'm putting words in your mouth, but the beginning of a belief system for you.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that experience?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it was the first roadkill that I ever picked up. And I remember it so well. I was riding my bicycle and there was a roadkill squirrel and I rode past the roadkill squirrel. And as I rode past, I heard the squirrel say something like, if I was a dead human, would you just pass by me? And I stopped my bike and I remember thinking, what the fuck? Did that squirrel just talk to me? And also, what the fuck? If it was a dead human, would I just pass it by? And so I didn't know what to do. And so I stopped and there's cars blasting past. And I must have, I don't know if I went and got a plastic bag or if I had one in my backpack or something, but I was like, I need to do something with this squirrel. Like, this is horrendous. How many hundreds of people are blasting past this dead being on the side of the road? And what if this was a human? This would never happen, you know?
Yeah.
And so I remember taking a plastic bag and trying to pick him up. And I was so afraid of death at that point. I like could barely touch him. Like couldn't, I kept like, you know, like thinking maybe he was still alive or he might bite me or I don't know what it was. And I remember finally getting him in the plastic bag and hanging him on my bicycle handlebars and going back to my house. And I sat with him on my porch that night and until I could touch it with my bare hands. And eventually I was able to touch him and hold him. And I remember just holding him in my hands and being astonished at how beautiful he was and his fur and everything and his little whiskers and eyelashes. And I just was astounded. I think I wept actually, like at how beautiful this creature was and how he was dead. And this might have been before I ate the rat. I can't remember which one came first. It was probably before the rat because I didn't know how to skin at that point. I didn't know how to gut. I didn't know how to do anything. And I don't know if I may have taken his paws for earrings or something like that. I might have like tried to do something or I just buried him. I can't remember. And so that I did start burying roadkill in the yard before I knew how to process them or eat them or do anything with them, just because I thought, wow, if I was hit by a car and I was splattered on the side of the road, what would I want done? And so it did become a spiritual practice. Those women that I was living with in Olympia, we would all do it together. We'd collect roadkill and basically give them burials and say words of thanks to them and apologies, and just move them off of the pavement so that they could at least be decomposed into the
Yes.
earth.
Yeah.
And also keep other critters from coming and trying to eat them and also getting hit on the road. And those kinds of relationships are what started blooming in this realizing that animals are alive, truly alive, and are able to communicate and want to communicate. And it's not like hippie woo woo, like these animals are actually alive. And we're part of the network with them, and they're communicating with us whether we're conscious of it or not. And so, yeah, absolutely. It awoke me to this idea of the world being animate and able to have conversation. And the more you treat things like they're able to have a conversation, the more conversation they're willing to have with you. And I've realized that now in my hunting path, that if you treat another human like they're not capable of communicating or they're not intelligent enough to talk with you, do you think that person is going to want to have conversations with you? No, they're going to ignore you and think you're a dick, right? Like, and so if that's how we're treating these animals and the plants and the wind and the water and all these beings that are actually alive and capable of communication, then of course that's why we feel so alone. It's why we feel like we're the only species that's able to communicate, because we're treating everyone like we're the only ones able to communicate. And so once you can shift that a little bit and actually speak with them out loud and eat them so that your body is physically calibrated to them and made up of them, I think these dialogues that can happen are, I mean, it's astounding actually. And it helps ameliorate that distinct modern dilemma of feeling like you're alone.
Yes. That's such a good point. There is, I think, I mean, people are talking about it and it's affecting people's health on a enormous scale. A loneliness epidemic is, I think, a term that's actually being used for people, especially in America, but I'm sure around the world. With technology and everything that's happening, it's making people withdraw and not connect with one another. But then it's interesting to hear that there's even more of a build on that, in the sense that nature itself and feeling connected to that and to the animals and to the plants and the trees and everything around you is a way of regaining perhaps a feeling of connection that we once had more of, I guess, traditionally.
Yeah.
So it's a very long-winded way of saying exactly what you what you've just been saying, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where to go next. So could you talk a little bit more about communicating with nature and how and tuning into how it wants to connect with you?
Yeah. Yeah. So as a foundation, I consider myself an animist, which that term itself can be a little problematic in that I think animism was coined by an anthropologist who knows how long ago. And I think originally it kind of meant this anthropologist was studying some indigenous culture somewhere. And I think it was a little bit of a derogatory term, right? In the way that materialism in Western culture has passed down this philosophy that living beings like us are animate, and that a stone is inanimate or plastic is inanimate. So it has this really hardline division of what's alive and what's not. And the things that aren't alive are considered inert uh, objects that aren't capable of decision or personhood, right? And so animism is the way of walking through the world in which everything is alive. actually and truly alive. Even my plastic bucket that I use every day is truly alive, and it has personhood, and that we're all part of this living cosmos together. And animism as a way of being a human is one of the most prolific and long-standing ways of thinking about the world that exist on the planet. Everywhere on the planet has had traditions of being animistic before the advent of certain philosophical inheritances that we were passed down that really sought to make those divisions between living and not living, or animate and inanimate. And so there's another guy who has a podcast called The Emerald, and he said it really beautifully when he said, animism is normative consciousness for humans. Animism is normative consciousness. And so if we can accept that, if we can get past the kind of insecure idea of like, oh, it feels silly to talk to this plant, or it feels silly to talk to this animal. If we can get past that really deeply ingrained consequence of being colonized, I think that is what that is. It's like we were really trained in this very strict way of looking at reality. And if we start to step outside of that reality, we have these internal indoctrinations that make us judge ourselves for it even, right? And so if we can step outside of that and we actually start these dialogues, I mean, amazing things can happen. And that's in my hunting practice. I haven't found many human teachers that were able to teach me how to hunt in a way that I was searching for. But what I came to is, oh, well, what if I just ask the animals themselves how they want to be hunted? And so as a spiritual practice for the last, maybe 8 years or something hunting, or maybe a little bit longer, I've been asking in dialogue with the animals I'm hunting as to how to approach them, how to tend to them, how to take care of their families, all of those sorts of things. And I mean, I've had incredible experiences with that. So it's not like, sometimes it's not even like left to interpretation, the conversations that go on. Like the times I've been successful hunting, there's been no questions asked. The animals have walked right up to me and looked me in the eyes and presented themselves broadside. So that sort of thing, right? And
it's so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Again, so many things to ask you about. I guess I want to ask you in a second about your experiences with hunting, and then animism, and maybe if you could actually tell, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those stories, that would be amazing. But it's also interesting, and please don't interpret what I'm about to say in any way as derogatory, because in my mind, I think this is like a beautiful thing. But I actually think that it seems like there are elements, like when you're born and you're young and you are a child, you have more of an open mind about many things, creativity. And I wonder, from the way that you're describing a way of perceiving the world, or your belief of everything having spirituality and identity, if that's correct, if I'm interpreting it the right way. But children often do that, right? They don't distinguish between, okay, humans are the ones that are like allowed to be people, and nothing else is. I mean, they'll be free flowing and make friends with with anything. And I think that's quite interesting in a way, right? So many things that we have are like born into, as then like sort of like drilled out of us as we grow up and are told like the correct way to behave.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I love that about children, that they don't have those indoctrinations yet. And so their ability to be in the living world with all the living beings, right? And they know the personality of the rock that they're playing with. And even like I remember one of the little girls I used to watch, she had my pliers, my like needle nose pliers, and she had this whole relationship with my needle nose pliers, you know? And I thought, oh man, I felt bad for having ignored the needle nose pliers for so long, you know?
It's so true. It's so true. And also, I think that there is like a, even now, I mean, yeah, there are instincts, aren't there? Like once you get to know your favorite objects or your things around you, you give them, you sense their character. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to, I try to remember, but I forget all the time that the beings around me are alive. And so even something as simple as my tea kettle or my knives, for instance, for butchering animals, you know, I try to treat them really well because they're beings that help collaborate for my life to work. And so we have this idea of like, I'm an individual and I can make it on my own. But actually, all the beings around us, the glass jar I'm drinking my coffee out of, all these beings are all corroborating and supporting us, and we're all in relationship with them all the time. And what does it mean if they have personhood, but we are treating them as if they don't and forcing them to do what we want all the time? And so I think of that with my knives, for instance, when I'm butchering animals. I take really good care of them because they're my tools and I need them. And also, I feel like if you don't tend to them well, knives especially, right? They like blood. I mean, that's what knives are for, is like cutting meat and bleeding out an animal. And so what happens if I don't treat my knife really well? Then it could bite me, right? And that sort of thing. So just I try to remember that not just the plants and animals outside my door, but all the ones inside my home are also a part of this living cosmos and our ecosystem that we rely on and that make us who we are.
It's such a good point. It's also you making me think about the fact that maybe modern society, which is actually training people to be built around possessing and owning a lot of objects. If you have a ton of stuff, it's going to be hard to connect with those things. Anyway, right? But if you have less items or less objects that you use more for everything in your life, you're bound to have a much stronger connection with those things anyway.
That's right. Yeah, and I think this is one of the threads, like I was talking about in the beginning of this conversation, that make us human. I think it's our relationship with our ordinary lives, the cup that we use, the bowl, the spoon, the instrument we play, our bedding, right? It's like the ordinary objects around us that really inform us of our culture, our humanity, the stories that we carry, and what we're employing for these daily living. This are just our daily lives. I think that they become holy and sacred by us caring for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to we've kind of like, we're jumping around all over the place, which I guess was inevitable as all good podcasts do. I guess the place I would love to hop to now is you talked about eating roadkill, leaving veganism as a way of life, connecting with animals. When did the desire to learn the skills to start hunting begin? And can you talk a bit about that process? And I know that you also wanted to go into the whole act of like making your own tools and building bows and flint knapping. So I'd love to hear that whole process and how it began and continued.
Yeah. It was somewhere around the rat eating roadkill era.
Okay.
Once we started skinning a more roadkill and tanning hides, and starting our little baby steps towards using every part. I decided that, well, first of all, my body does a lot better as a meat eater than it did as a vegan. And that I wanted that relationship with killing animals. And I had some real idealism. I wanted to learn how to use every single part of a deer before I ever hunted a deer. And I wanted to learn how to make bows. I wanted to learn how to flint knap to make the stone tip points on my arrows. I wanted to learn how to make the arrows. I wanted to learn how to make my quiver. I wanted to learn every step of a traditional hunting way before I ever even approached an animal to die for me in that way. And so it's been a long journey. I mean, I'm still on that journey, honestly. And that was a decade ago, over a decade ago now. And so I started piecing together just little tidbits of things that I'd hear from different people about how to use different parts. And there's these ancestral skills gatherings that I started attending, and they're wonderful. I mean, if you ever have a chance to check them out, they're all over the country now, and they're week-long gatherings with world-class experts teaching really cool skills. So I started attending these gatherings and picked up some teachers along the way, and started apprenticing under two bow makers, who one recently passed, bless his soul. And so I started learning traditional Osage orange long bows, and did that for years, and finally made a bow good enough, well, like strong enough that I could kill a deer with it, you know. And in this time I'm also learning how to flint knap and making stone points, learning how to make arrows from roes all the way through, like getting sinew from roadkill deer that I then fletch the wild turkey feathers to the arrow with, and fletch the stone tip point to, and really taking my time in all these skills. I learned how to brain tan deer skins, you know, how to use different parts of the bones, and how the organs and the stomachs and the bladder and the heart sac and all these things. So I had these ideals, right? Like
Yeah.
the first deer I was ever going to kill, I was going to be with my traditional longbow and my stone tipped arrow and all these things. And I realized that I was like, it was such a slow process that I actually wanted the relationship with hunting before I reached the end of that journey, which I don't know if that journey ever actually ends. And so I started hunting with a gun probably, I don't know, 8 years ago or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it makes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I don't use a traditional bow. I use a compound bow.
Nice.
But I mean, in my mind, no offense to anyone using compound bows, it feels there's always like a thing to look towards where you feel like what you're doing is cheating.
Right.
To like, because there's always something more, you know, something more difficult, or a more pure form of approaching the task. I guess it's understandable that, at least from my experience, like the amount that you have to learn. I mean, even from what you're saying about building the tools to actually do the job, but then to understand what you need to do, the level of connection you need to have to actually get close enough to make an ethical kill. It's
Right.
such an enormous learning curve.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it makes absolute sense to at least learn some of that process with a rifle. Could you tell me about some of your early experiences hunting with a rifle?
Yeah. So I had, before actually went hunting with a rifle, I lived in Montana, and I actually helped run a mobile slaughter business
Okay.
for, yeah, for some time. So we were going out and killing pigs and cows and sheep and llamas and um critters of all shapes and sizes for local families. And so I had a lot of shooting experience and a lot of processing experience through that. Um, so hunting didn't feel like that far of a step away from that, though it is in some regards, I mean, for sure. So my first hunting experience, I I called together like my first women's hunting camp, and it was so fun. And I had my friend from LA come out, who is one of my best friends ever, and she's like opposite ends of the spectrum from me, you know. And we went hunting together, and yeah, it was with a 30-30 rifle and in a river bottom, and we were going for a whitetail or a mule deer, and this is in Montana. And it was so spectacular. I mean, right, I had been doing years of preparation for hunting, and so lots of praying and making offerings and learning about deer and learning how to take really good care of them and ensure the wellness of the deer populations, all of that sort of thing. And so when the time came, I felt so confident in myself and in what I was doing. And basically, how I've come to approach hunting is I'm making a case for myself. I'm not really super interested in sneaking up on somebody in their home and killing them, but I am interested in, can I show up, make a case for who I am and why I want a deer to die, and then see what the deer say to that case. And, you know, honestly, I've gone home empty handed more than I've been successful hunting. That's like hands down. I'm not a very good hunter in that way, because I'll only take a shot if it's clear to me that they are presenting themselves. So that first time hunting, oh my gosh, we were crawling on our bellies through the brush in a river bottom, and all the deer were courting. It was like right before the rut season. So they were all chasing each other around. Oh, it was amazing. And I remember thinking to myself, why don't I do this when I'm not hunting? Why don't I just crawl around on my belly and watch the animals when I'm not hunting? But that cued me into, oh, but this hunting is how you have this relationship with the animals.
Yes.
It's like the motivation as a human being who likes to eat meat to get out there and know these critters and know the secret deer culture. Like I felt like a spy watching them court each other and dance around and play. It was miraculous, actually. And so we just laid on our bellies watching these deer, and I prayed that one of them come present himself if they wanted anyone to be killed. And we laid for a long time watching them. And we just kept praying. We were whispering, praying out loud. And one of them this young buck walked in front of me. And I remember him looking me in the eyes and walking towards me. And I remember saying to my friend, like, is this happening? Like, is this actually, you know, my heart's just pounding. It's my first kill. Like, is it actually happening? He's actually walking towards us. Look, he's looking. And she's like, yeah, it's happening. It's happening. And he walked towards us and still looking at us, turned broadside. Wow. And so I was like, even then though, I was like, should I take the shot? And she's like, yeah, dude, take the shot. And so I took the shot, and I shot a little low. I hit him in the lungs. And he just stood there for a while. And then he kind of walked off, and I did the thing that my hunting mentors have told me not to do, which is do not go after the animal immediately. Sit down and wait. And I couldn't, because my adrenaline was going crazy. And I thought, no, but I didn't do the kill shot. And, you know, like now he's wounded and I have to chase him down and shoot him again. And so I went after him, which is just so ridiculous, and pushed him. And he disappeared. I mean, I couldn't. He just, all of a sudden, all the deer were gone. And because I hit him in the lungs, there wasn't a blood trail. There was no snow on the ground. Turns out I'm not a very good tracker. And I was like, just so kind of lost in the weeds. You know, I was weeping, couldn't find this deer. I was just imagining him dying a slow, horrible, painful death. And it was everything that I like judged other people for doing, you know. Yeah. And I had forgotten to mention that at this time I had also been a professional big game skinner at that butcher shop that I was working in Montana. So I skinned hundreds of deer, and I was very judgmental. When a deer came in with multiple gunshots, I would be like, well, a hunter shouldn't be hunting if you don't know how to kill an animal, you know. Yeah. And here I am. I did it. And so I'm weeping and I'm saying to myself, this is why women don't hunt. I should never be a hunter. You know, I'm really getting down on myself. Wow. I'm going vegan. I'm never doing this again. And we tracked, or didn't track because I don't know how to track, or I didn't know how to track, but we walked around looking for this deer for hours and couldn't find him. And we almost gave up. And I remember calling in a friend being like, I need help. I don't know. I wounded this deer and I need help finding him. I don't know what I'm doing. And he showed up and we're all looking for this deer. And I remember taking a few steps, and it was right before I was about to turn around to say, you guys, I'm done for the day. Like, we'll have to come back tomorrow and look for him. I just can't do it anymore. And I look up, and the deer is laying right in front of me, kind of wedged between some fallen cottonwood trees. And he's still alive. And he's on the ground. And I just burst into tears. I dropped to my knees, and he's looking me in the eyes still. And we were like, oh, he's here. We found him. We found him. We all gathered around him. And I just held his face, and I was weeping, and I was apologizing to him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll never hunt again. And I remember him saying to me, oh, I'm here to teach you. And that calmed everything. And I thought, right, okay. He's here to teach me. I'm learning a hard lesson, but it's okay. And so we had a knife, and we were able to cut his jugular and bleed him out while I kissed him on the nose. And so he died in my arms like that while I was kissing him. Oh, man. And that was a good learning. It was such good learning.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. And, after that, I really started questioning that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. We're trying. I didn't grow up being a hunter. I'm not in a hunter-gatherer society. Like, we're wandering our way back towards this way on like our little wobbly fawn legs. And of course we're going to stumble. And of course we're going to make mistakes. And I pray for forgiveness for those mistakes, and I don't want it to stop anyone from ever trying. And I don't want it to stop us from continuing to try even when we do make mistakes. And I don't even think that shot was a mistake necessarily. It was a huge learning journey for me that I had to go on.
Yes. I think it's being a relatively new hunter myself, 5 or 6 years I've been hunting, going through some not identical, but some similar experiences of my first deer that I shot with a bow in America. It was not a perfect shot, and that's the thing, because you have so much to learn, and you don't even realize that you're making mistakes at that time. And what I thought was a deer standing behind a fallen log, that I was dropping an arrow behind the log to hit perfectly in the right place, in the heart and lungs. It was actually laying behind the log, and that tilted body angle meant that I smashed it in the shoulder blade, and the arrow didn't penetrate very well. And that same feeling of disappointment, frustration, feeling sorry that you've made a poor job of something that you have thought about a lot, about doing the most perfect ethical practice that you can, seeing the thing, or seeing it run away or limp away, be injured, was a very difficult experience. Yeah. And then the act of tracking, or what you think is tracking at the time. I mean, I think I was very, very lucky to be taught by some people in South Africa basics of tracking beforehand, which helped me no end, because it made me go against my instincts, which is the same about, I don't know why, but I think a turkey was the first thing I ever actually shot with a bow, and I had the same exact instinct it's to just like run after the thing.
Yeah,
it's strange, isn't it? It's so like, I don't know where that comes from, but you're like, it runs away, and you're like, go get it. Yeah. Which is such a face palm from every hunter that knows anything about hunting kind of moment. So yeah, I think going through that similar process, and the anguish of like making an animal suffer, and then finding it and managing to solve the mistakes, or at least learn from and then fix the mistakes that you made in the first place, is a powerful experience, which is, I guess, a necessary one. Yeah. It's also the use of a knife as well as a thing, which I think is quite powerful. The proximity of it, right? Using a knife to end an animal's life is so different than using a rifle or even a bow.
Yeah.
Your closeness to the animal it changes the experience.
It does. Yeah, it really does. Yeah, to be that close to a wild animal, especially, and use a knife on them. Yeah. And, I think a lot about these things that we're discussing now because having worked at the mobile slaughter in Montana and participating in killing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animals, and then also being the skinner, the big game skinner there, and skinning uh, over 2,000 animals, big game animals, deer and elk at that shop.
Wow.
And then now running my school where, we teach slaughter classes. Something I talk a lot about is how in the wild, when a wolf tracks down an animal, I mean, sometimes it can take 24 hours or longer for the wolf to kill the deer. And sometimes they're eating the guts out while the deer is still alive.
Yes, yeah.
And it doesn't mean necessarily that that's a bad death. It's this interesting thing. We find ourselves as humans, and what does a humane death look like, and what do we owe the animals, and what is a good animal death? And it's just something I tell new folks that want to try, that are afraid of making mistakes, that I think that even if you don't make the cut perfectly the first time, or don't make the shot perfectly the first time, often the death that we're giving these animals is still way faster than a death that they would be experiencing in the wild. And so having some grace and compassion with yourself, and it's okay. Like, yeah, it doesn't mean the bear who's killing the deer is doing something bad by killing them in the way that they do. So just trying to open and expand our idea of like what's acceptable and what a good animal death is.
It's a really interesting can of worms, can of worms to open, because I also feel the same way about. There's a perception from people who live maybe more in urban environments, who aren't close to death in any way, who feel like hunting is cruel. And again, that is the sort of storyline I often tell myself, is that even imperfect hunting moments are often a lot more humane, is not perhaps a good word to use, but a lot more kind than what nature often provides as a means to an end, be it starvation, disease, death by a predator who's, like you said, can be eating an animal for a long time before it's actually killing it. So I guess I'm curious. I'd love your opinion on this, because I guess it's a complicated thing in a world of where these beings are all eating one another and surviving from each other. It seems like, at least my perception at the moment, but it's open to changing, is that nature itself is not super compassionate in the way that you described, like a wolf might be eating a prey animal for a long period of time. They're not interested in necessarily killing it immediately unless it's a danger to them. It seems like I perceive that, or I have perceived that in the past, as like not super compassionate. But what's your perspective on animals and their behavior to each other? Because I guess as humans, we have a bunch of layers of morality and extra expectations of what we think is the appropriate way to behave. But do animals, do you feel like animals have that, or do they it's just a different set of ideals?
Wow, it's such a good question. I think what's coming to mind right now is that the animals have been living alongside each other for so long, and that the prey animals, for instance, a deer or a sheep, have certain ways and mechanisms in themselves for being in that dance. Because I think of this kind of the fluctuation of life and death and hunting, being eaten and eating as a huge dance. And so to me, and I've experienced it when, for instance, in the slaughter classes, when we're killing sheep, as soon as you get them down on the ground, they relax and they don't usually fight. Some do, but they don't usually fight. And there's just something that happens where they release. And I think of it as a mechanism of a prey animal, and that it probably comes from that. When the wolves come to kill them, they are able to surrender. And who's to say whether or not that should happen, like a wolf killing a sheep taking 24 hours? I don't understand. I don't really understand all of it by any means, but I'm wondering if there's certain things that happen in the dying process that are proper and necessary to experience as you die. And I wonder, this is something that I don't know. I'm not saying I understand these things or that I know the right way or anything, but our idea of a good death being quick and painless with a bullet, for instance, that kind of death, the explosion of your brain cavity and that huge, immense force, that's a very new thing on the scene, right? Bullets and guns are what, like a couple hundred years old, or maybe longer, 400 years old. But given the span of how long animals have been being killed, bullets are so new on the scene. And so I wonder what that kind of death is like for animals that did not evolve with bullets, that actually evolved with these much slower ways of dying. And I don't know. I'm not saying anyone is better than the other, I just wonder about it. And I don't know about the compassion thing. I think animals are themselves. And I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about that question for a long time, honestly. I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
No, I think you've already given a really in-depth answer. It's a difficult question that just popped in my mind.
Yeah,
but
it's good.
Conversations like this that make these things, pop up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious. You talked about the women's hunting groups. I'd love you to, tell me a little bit more about that. I don't know if you were part of setting those women's hunting groups up, or if you joined them and that's how the whole thing worked. But I guess what motivated, I guess it's kind of an obvious question, but worth talking about as well, is that why did you feel the need to be part of an all women's hunting group?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it was my idea to hold a space where women of all varieties and of all skill sets could come together and explore what it means to be a hunter. And I really wanted that in the beginning of my hunting days. And I had wonderful male teachers who I learned a lot from, and I love them, and they're dear to my heart. And they hunted in a way that wasn't quite right for me, and it's okay. And I still love them. I remember getting a deer in the crosshairs once with a group of men, and I didn't take the shot because I didn't feel comfortable in the way that I wanted to honor that animal. I felt like it might have been judged or something. And also, even though I worked at a butcher shop and I helped run the mobile slaughter, and I was a professional skinner and I had a lot of experience in those realms, when there were men around, I would still find myself deferring to the men.
Really?
And for whatever reason, whether it's societal conditioning or my own personal affect or whatever it is, I just found myself really holding myself back and deferring and feeling like I didn't know enough to come forward with a skill set or something. And so I thought, wow, if it's happening to me, and I know that I'm really, really skilled in I can skin a fucking critter. I know how to skin so well. But if I'm still holding myself back, then what is it like for other women, you know? And so I just decided, yeah, what if I just started hosting a camp where women could come and we could all gather and be beginners together and really try to figure out what way of hunting even feels good to us. Like a lot of the women that I was talking to, they were looking for a teacher, they were looking for a way, but they didn't even know really what that was.
Yes.
And so I just said, well, okay, let's just all get together and camp for 7 days or 10 days in the backcountry of Montana. And so I did that almost every hunting season. It's been a couple years now because I've been in transition. But oh, it was so beautiful. So it's an opportunity for us to come together, and there's a lot of singing, there's a lot of praying, there's a lot of giving thanks, and there's a lot of just absolute beginner skill. Like, how do you even hold a gun? Like, you know, just really, really, really beginner stuff, which a lot of women are kind of nervous to do around men who have been doing this their whole lives and learned from their grandpas and that kind of thing. And also, something that one of my mentors helped me with when I was thinking about this was just kind of saying, killing an animal is actually the least important part about hunting camp. That is, it's not actually the priority. The priority is like, how do we want to approach this? How do we want to be in the forest? How do we want the animals to see us? And we realized too, camping out there, that hundreds of animals were being killed all around us, right? In the backcountry of Montana, just hundreds of deer and elk and bears being killed. And we thought, well, what if it's part of what we're doing is actually just giving thanks to all those animals that are being killed all around us? And so those were kind of the foundations of the women's hunting camp, and it's grown since that very first time when I had my friend from LA out. You know, every year it's grown more and more and reaching more people. And my ideal would be that women who come to the women's hunting camp are able to go back to their own ecosystems and homes and start their own women's hunting camp and get their group of women together and be able to approach this in a way that feels really good and authentic and solid and in alignment with whatever your worldview might be.
Has there been a moment where you've really seen someone come into the camp and seen them grow? Is there a particular moment or memory that you have of guiding them and helping them in some capacity, or seeing them get the instruction that they need so that they can then grow? I don't know if the result is making a successful kill or if it's something else, but is there something that pops into mind?
Yeah, I can think of a couple moments. The big one I can think of is my friend Kate, who is so wonderful. And she made her first kill at a women's hunting camp, and she killed a squirrel. And it was so spectacular because, I mean, and she had gone out that morning. We had been tracking. We had done all the like ceremonies and rituals and singing and praying. And yeah, she came back with a squirrel that she had killed, and she was just so lit up. And I thought, this is a perfect opportunity because I really view all life pretty equally. Like, to me, a squirrel is as amazing and miraculous as a deer, you know? And so, and they're little squirrels in Montana. They're little pine squirrels, so they're quite small.
Okay.
Yeah, and she came in, and yeah, everybody in camp was like celebrating and cheering, and she skinned it in the tent, and she had all of her, I remember she had done like a tarot spread, and she had all of her tools out, and it was just, we just had such a good time. And she was like marked, you know, we marked her with the blood of like, now you are a huntress. And I think she's continued on this path. She lives in Georgia. I haven't seen her in years, but I think that she has continued on the huntress path. And she really blossomed then. And also, I remember that year we had done like spa days with like marrow, like putting marrow on our faces.
Oh, wow.
And like, yeah, and there's like eyeball juice has a type of constituent in it. I forget what it's called. But they use it in like very fancy cosmetic like serums for your face and stuff. And so we had like taken eyeball juice and we were doing we were doing like eyeball juice on our face and marrow and like using bones to do the like whatever this shit is, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the women were really just getting super comfortable in that too, of just like processing and being bloody, and then also taking it a step further of like, right, actually this stuff is really good for us, not just internally but like on our skin and our hair. And so getting silly with it too and having these like backcountry huntress spa days was just such a blast. Yeah,
That sounds like fun.
yeah.
I'm not sure I suggest that with some of my hunting buddies. It might.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that if you put eyeball juice on your beard, man,
makes it shine perfectly.
that's hilarious.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've talked a lot about, I mean, we've covered so much already, but you've mentioned your time processing animals and skinning a bunch of animals and learning that skill. I guess maybe we could talk a little bit more about that. I guess I got a couple of little questions here that I was thinking about. I mean, was there like a transition? Were you into the ancestral skills and traditional techniques before that moment when you were processing on a larger scale? I guess which came first is the question, and I guess did they inform each other?
Yeah, definitely. I had been into the ancestral skills for years at that point, and had studied a lot of tanning traditions and animal processing traditions, and had done a lot of roadkill. And
Yes.
at some point I was living out of my truck again, so it was like I had graduated from hitchhiking and hopping trains to having my own truck, and I was traveling around in my truck. And it was about to be hunting season, and I was just looking for a place to skin animals for a couple weeks to get paid in hides so that I could just have a badass hide stack that I could tan.
Nice.
And so I was traveling around Montana just looking for a place, and ended up driving through this place called Ennis, Montana, which is south of Bozeman, a little town there, and by West Yellowstone. And I went into the butcher shop and asked if I could skin some deer in exchange for hides. And he wasn't having it. Actually, it was kind of funny because I was wearing a dress, and he was like, I don't know about this. And I was like, I bet I could skin better than you. I was being all cocky. I'd skin like, who knows, like 40 roadkill or something, not very many. And he was like, how many animals you skinned? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Oh, a few. He's like, I've skinned thousands. And he was like kind of grumpy with me. He's this old Italian butcher. But I kind of held my own. And he's like, okay, well, if you come back tomorrow, we'll see how you do. And so I came back. It was opening season. So I came back and skinned animals for the first day, and he ended up giving me the job, and I ended up staying for 4 years. And so that's like, so I had been into ancestral skills, eating the rats, roadkill. I had helped start Buffalo Bridge.
Okay, you had.
With my friends. Yeah. So Buffalo Bridge happened 10 years ago. So I had done some stuff with the buffalo hunt. And then I think it was maybe after the first Buffalo Bridge. So we're talking 8 years ago or something, is when 7, 9, I don't know. Time is weird. 9 years ago is when then I landed in Montana, and I got that job at that butcher shop. And I fell in love with one of the butchers. And so we had a romance and ended up living together. And he's who I was running the mobile slaughter with. And I was the big game skinner there at that shop for 4 years and did the mobile slaughter. And so I really just went head first into professional animal processing and skinning and all those skill sets, which was awesome. It was the best job I could ever ask for, and so I got to skin animals, and then hunters usually don't want the heads. So I was able to get all the brains I wanted for brain tanning because I'm a brain tanner.
Yes.
So all the brains, all the legs, all the hides. I mean, just all the bones I could ever want. And so I was like trying to use as much as I could from the industrial processing side of things, even though we were a small butcher shop. You know, we're not like big ag by any means, like a tiny little butcher shop, specialty butcher shop. And so I just got an opportunity to do all the things that I loved doing, but like in mass. You know, every hunting season, I'd skin about 500, 600 animals. And so it was just like all day, every day for 8 weeks, you know, and then processing all the brains and all the bones and making bone broth and skinning all the legs. And I mean, just, you know, being able to not just learn the ancestral skills, but actually having an opportunity to experiment like so much that I could actually really take the skills so much farther, because it's like, okay, well, here's one way to skin an animal. What if I did this? What if I did that? What if I did that? And then be able to test that on hundreds of animals, you know what I mean? And just like all the ways of rendering fat, all of the different ways of using the lower leg skins. Just, I mean, it was amazing. Yeah. I'm so thankful for that time in my life. And I learned so much. And oh my gosh, I mean, I'm still moving through. I have like maybe 5 hides left from that time of my life that are yet to be tanned, that I'm about to tan. So the generosity of those animals and my positioning in that job and the abundance that those animals gifted me literally propelled my life for the last 8 years. I mean, I can say most of what I have, money wise and clothing wise, and like my skill sets came from the generosity of those animals.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious. 2 questions. One is a technical question, which I guess I don't know enough about it, so I'm curious. You said you're still using some of the hides and you haven't tanned them yet. How, and that was, I mean, a number of years ago that you stopped, you know, that you've had these stockpiled hides. How long can you keep a hide for, and what are you doing to keep it in an okay condition to then tan?
Yeah. So there's 2 primary methods. The method that I use, you flesh the fat and the meat off of there, and then I rub borax in it. And borax is just, you know, that stuff you can buy at the store. Rub borax in it and dry it out completely. And they'll be stable that way as long as bugs don't get into it, which borax helps deter the bugs. I mean, they'll be stable for years and years and years. So that's my way that I do for my personal hides. Most of the time, people will do wet salting. So even with fat and flesh on a hide, you can salt them with feed salt you get from the feed store. You salt them and you can bag them, and they'll be stable for years that way as well. Okay. It won't be the hair, most likely the hair will slip out, but if you're doing something like hair off, it's totally fine.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're making leather without the hide, then you're sorted. Interesting. Yeah. So borax you think is superior to the traditional, or not traditional, but the way that I guess traditional within modern hunting, salt is often the common way of doing it. So you think borax works better?
I do. I learned that from our elder Mel Beatty, who's in he's got to be in his 80s now. And it's because salt, it kills the soil. So if you have a bunch of salted hides, you're rinsing the salt off, that salt water's got to go somewhere. Yes. And if it gets on the ground, it'll kill the soil, the plant's there forever. You can't ever get it out again. And if you're tanning mass hides, which I haven't in a few years, but I was for years, then you have all this salt to deal with, and it's just a pain in the ass. So borax is awesome because it does not harm the soil. It's relatively inexpensive. You can get it anywhere. And yeah, it just doesn't hurt anything.
Interesting. So, I had no idea. I always assumed from the packaging of borax that it was something a little more harmful. But that's just my own assumptions based on like packaging design, I guess. So that's so interesting to know.
Yeah, it looks like a chemical, but it really is. I think it's just like it's not quite a mineral, but it's just something mined from the earth, just in its pure form.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then the second question that I had from what you were saying before was about, I've written this down. I need to figure out what it means now because I wrote a quick note. It says perfect buffalo. Okay. Now I think I know what that means. So what it was is all of these skills that you learned through, you had like so many hides and animals that you could process through this, through the hunting seasons in that time. Did you find that you were then applying those skills, those learnings, that sort of accelerated curve of progress into your time with Buffalo Bridge?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think my first year at Buffalo Bridge, I was okay. I was kind of skilled, but then that's when, after the first year, is when I moved to Montana and got all the skills. So every year after that, going to Buffalo Bridge. Should I explain what Buffalo Bridge
Yes,
is?
let's do the whole.
Okay.
Let's just do, because it's a section, and it's like we've been dancing around so much. We're kind of covering it a little bit each time, but let's do a thorough section on Buffalo Bridge.
Yeah. So it was started by my friend Katie, and she happened to be in Yellowstone and saw a group of hunters outside of Yellowstone. This was 11 years ago now, I think. And she just walked up to them, and they were some native guys. And she asked if she could dig around in the gut piles because she is into primitive skills too. And she wanted to like see what was in the gut piles. And buffalo gut piles are massive,
I can
they're
imagine.
like boulders. And so I think at first some of the guys were like, okay, a little bit weirded out by her. But I think as soon as she was kind of covered in blood and guts, and she was wearing brain tan pants, one of the hunters was like, hey, like, come over to my buffalo, like, who are you and what are you doing here? And where'd you get those brain tan pants? And she was like, oh, I tanned them. And they just started this dialogue, and he's like, okay. And so, at the end of it, he was kind of like, we could use people like you out here. And that sparked her idea to then the next year, she put out a call to people in the ancestral skills community to gather and camp for a month right across the road from the hunting grounds outside of Yellowstone and North Yellowstone, and just assist the tribal hunters. And so that's how Buffalo Bridge started. So I answered that call the first year and was part of the founding crew. And so with that family, that first Nez Perce family that Katie had talked to, he kind of spread the word for us. And it was awesome. We showed up. We were there for a month. A lot of these hunters, so I think there's 9 tribes now that come from all over the place to hunt in Yellowstone. If tribes have historical use of Yellowstone, then they have treaties from the 1800s or so where they're now being allowed to come. This buffalo hunt is really new. Unfortunately, it's only been since the 90s that tribes have been allowed to come back and hunt. And every year, a new tribe is getting their treaty reinstated, which is awesome. And it's shitty that it's been over 100 years and they're just now getting their treaty rights recognized.
Yeah.
And so, right, there's like the Yakima tribe, the Shoshone Bannock, the Nez Perce, the Umatilla, the Crow. Gosh, I'm not going to remember all the tribes, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne. And it's kind of cool because since we've been out there, we've seen new tribes getting their treaties almost every year, which is really amazing. So we have tribes coming in from all over the place. And a lot of times, it might be a handful of guys who are hunting for grandmas and grandpas and ceremony and weddings and funerals and this auntie and that uncle. And they're hunting for their whole families. And buffalo are huge. And so what Buffalo Bridge does is we're just there to assist them if they want it in whatever ways they want. And so, there might be 2 guys that shoot 5 buffalo. And then they'll come over and they'll be like, hey, we really need your guys' help.
Yeah.
And we have a crew of whatever, 10 to sometimes 30 people at Buffalo Bridge. And then we just go out and we gut, we skin, we help quarter, we help drag, we help load, all the things, whatever they want. And sometimes the hunters don't need any help at all, and sometimes they got it. They got the crew that they need and no big deal. And sometimes they're so thankful because maybe yesterday they killed 5 already and now they got 5 again today and they're just exhausted. And so that's where we come in, is just offering our skills and our hands and in whatever ways needed. And oftentimes there's just this like really cool cross-cultural connection that happens. Because like when you're all bloody, it's a snowstorm, the sun is going down, there's 60-mile-an-hour winds, and you're out there freezing together and keeping your hands warm by sticking it inside the buffalo blood. You just like all the other things that could be divisive just fall away, and you're just cracking jokes and laughing, getting all delirious from working for 12 hours. And it's like this shared humanity really comes and weaves us all together. And because I was a butcher and helped with the mobile slaughter and a skinner, I can skin and take apart a critter really fast just by virtue of having done so many. And so those skills have been super crucial at Buffalo Bridge, like, yeah, it can be like, maybe I can think of several times where like one hunter killed 3 buffalo and the sun's going down and he's like, I need help so bad. And we can just show up and like, boom, 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 get it done. And it's just awesome. Yeah. And then a lot of times they'll gift us. It's not why we do it, but a lot of times they will gift us some meat. A lot of times they won't take, legally, they don't have to take the spine and the pelvis. But sometimes, a lot of times they'll just gift that to us, which, I mean, it's like 6 feet long, wow. And we have pressure canners. So we'll pressure cook, we'll zip it all together and pressure cook all the bones. And we'll just end up with like so much pulled meat and bone broth. And to them, it's a way of like gifting to us for helping. And we're so honored and so excited to just be able to touch a buffalo. I mean, really, that's like, we don't need any exchange at all. Just being there and being able to be of service is why we do it. And being able to just like participate in, I mean, it's a historic hunt. These people have been not allowed to hunt there for a couple hundred years, but before that, they were hunting for eons before that. And so to be able to be part of the story there is so spectacular. Yeah.
It sounds remarkable. I mean, I don't think I've even ever seen a buffalo. So yeah, sounds like an incredible experience. I'm curious, how does it work? The hunting, I mean, you said that the hunting season is through the winter. Like, I guess it's a month long, perhaps. It's the same time as you're there for. But I guess I'm curious, like, it's right by Yellowstone, but are they hunting? Are these groups hunting on Yellowstone, or are they hunting nearby, or how does that work with the buffalo?
Sorry, can we pause one more time?
Absolutely.
I apologize. I don't know why
Don't
my
worry.
battery is still saying that it's that I need to plug it in, and it's plugged in. So let me just troubleshoot this.
Don't worry at all.
Thank you. Goodness gracious. The extension cord was unplugged.
Ah.
Okay, let's see. Goodness. Whew. Run. Okay, I see a plugged in sign. Oh, we should be good.
Beautiful.
Whew. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I did just the same thing a couple of days ago. You think everything's sorted, but then you realize there's one cable that's missing.
Right. What the heck? Okay, let me catch my breath here.
Yeah.
What was the last question?
Okay, so the last question I had, I just have a couple of questions around Buffalo Bridge and your experiences. I mean, I say that, but I'm sure as soon as you tell me things, more questions will pop into my mind. So I want to put a number on it. I think. I guess my question was how, if you're open to sharing, how the hunting actually works, because I know that there are, you said maybe 9 different indigenous groups who are hunting this area, but then access to Yellowstone isn't actually allowed. Is that the case, or is there a specific area that they can hunt? I mean, I'm curious how it works.
Yeah. So my understanding of it is that, right, they're not allowed to hunt in Yellowstone proper. There is a northern annex to Yellowstone, just north of the big Gateway Arch, that most people don't realize is still Yellowstone because it was annexed in. And they have access to hunt in a very, very, very small portion of that. I mean, we're talking not even a mile long. I don't know, an eighth of a mile deep.
Oh, wow.
Like tiny, tiny, tiny square. And so essentially there's a couple other hunting spots they could hunt if buffalo got to them. But at that time of the year, most of the buffalo are going to be migrating because Yellowstone right there it's a valley. And so the buffalo are migrating at the bottom of the valley where there's food. And so it's kind of a bottleneck. They migrate through town and then kind of north of town and through parts where they're not allowed to be hunted. And they have to cross this imaginary line into the hunting zone for them to be legally hunted by the tribes. There's a few other spots farther north that they can also be hunted. And there's a couple of spots in the backcountry that I have been on some hunts up there. It's less, it seems like the migration is less up there because the buffalo are having to like walk through pretty steep terrain and snow and stuff. So what the buffalo are doing is migrating, looking for easy food at the river bottom. And so the government also operates a trap between Yellowstone proper and the hunting ground. So they have a big corral there where they lure buffalo in and trap them, and then they get them on semis and they ship them to slaughter because the government and all the agencies involved trying to cull the buffalo herd by a certain number every year. And that number can range from, 500 to 1,500. Sometimes, usually it's around the 1,000 range. They want 1,000 buffalo killed. And so rather than relying on tribal hunting alone to cull the herd, they're operating this trap, which can be very problematic because the trap is in the migration corridor towards the hunting ground. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound ideal.
It's not.
Almost sounds like it should be the other way around, surely.
Right.
I'm curious why also, I've got a lot of questions now.
Yeah.
As I said, why, I guess, population management, because there is a certain amount that the environment can sustain, sorry. If there's a buffalo, I can imagine eat a lot of food, and if there's too many of them, they'll cause a lot of damage. But surely, I mean, based on how many buffalo there used to be, there needs to be a growing population. So is there not a plan to move some of those buffalo in other places where they had been before? Or is Yellowstone the only place where they're actually protected because it's like public land? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of issues with the current management plan. And in my understanding, nobody's really that happy with it, including the people who are in the agencies. And so because there's 20 agencies involved, it's really hard to change the way that things are happening. It takes a long time, right? And so that carrying capacity number that they have is, I think it's like 2,500 is what biologists said 40 years ago Yellowstone could carry as far as buffalo, 2,500 buffalo, something to that effect. Now they're trying to rework that carrying capacity number because they're finding it's probably more like 10,500, something like that.
Oh, wow.
Within Yellowstone. And so from what I've heard, they're trying to change that number. It's going slow. Who knows if it'll actually happen or not. And I don't know what the current numbers of buffalo are right now, but every year since Buffalo Bridge started, there's more and more because that's what animals do, right? They
Yes.
want to, wild animals want to come back. And so it's causing issue because the more buffalo there are in the park, the more they want to migrate out, right? Like buffalo are, I mean, a lot of animals have these ancient migration patterns wired into their bodies. And of course, they want to migrate out because they're nomadic animals, but they're contained within essentially a prison, you know, in Yellowstone. And the real issue is that most of the public land or private land around Yellowstone is cattle ranch property. And so they're competing for the grass that the ranchers want for their cows. So there's a lot of tension there with the cattle companies, which I think is the real heart of the issue. A lot of folks are pushing for buffalo to be able to populate other public land. And there's a lot of snafus in that, you know, like if they were on the roads, what would buffalo roadkill look like? Which, you know, like that's a big one.
That's good. Yeah. Roadkill with a buffalo is going to be a major impact for any vehicle. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the biggest hangups of allowing them to inhabit some of their more traditional ranges, even though there's a ton of public land all around Yellowstone that they could potentially be in. I think those migration patterns are tricky, and especially because a lot of the roads in that area are actually old buffalo trails.
Yes.
Right? Like that, they were already roads, and so the buffalo want to walk on the roads, and so that's an issue. They do now, since Buffalo Bridge started, they have introduced a new program in which they capture some buffalo, they quarantine them to make sure they're free of whatever diseases, and then they send them to, I think this is true, I think they send them to the Fort Peck Reservation. And then from there, that's kind of a seed herd. And I have heard that they are starting to send buffalo out to different areas now from that seed herd. So as Yellowstone is the originating seed herd, then they go to Fort Peck and then they're introduced to other places. And while this is an awesome thing, I think, and it also presents its own set of problems because then they're still managed like cattle, you know, in a lot of places. They're like in a ranch kind of situation.
Yes. They're not just free ranging, doing their own thing, letting their instincts take over.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds complicated. It's always that balance of people taking value over animals, also safety of everyone involved, and money, I'm sure, is always a big factor, it seems to be. I'm sure there's people who are probably profiting from the culling of those buffalo as well.
Yes.
Would be my assumption.
Yep.
But not actually knowing. I'm just there's my skeptical brain kicking in there.
Yeah.
There was one other question I wanted to ask you about Buffalo Bridge. You were talking about these amazing experiences you're having with so many different groups of people up to your elbows, even probably up to your armpits more appropriately with buffalo.
Yeah.
Is there anything which I'm sure there's many things, but moments that you remember or things that you've learned from different cultures or skill sets that you've shared in those moments where you are or literally rolling up your sleeves and getting into it?
Yeah, there's so much. I learn something every time I take apart a critter.
Yeah.
And that I'm so blessed by that. Yeah, I mean, right, it's like, oh, everybody has a different way of doing things. So I might learn a new technique of like ringing the bung, like cutting the butthole out of the animal, which is like a tricky thing to do when you're hunting.
Yep.
So I might learn a new trick about that, or about how to break open the brisket, or different ways of gutting. And especially like in my experience, tribal folk, they really hunt. I mean, these guys grow up hunting, their dads hunt, their grandpas hunt. And so they have a lot of skill in that way, which is so cool. So I get to pick up little pieces of like kind of like technical material culture that way. And there are these really cool cross-cultural connection moments, like for instance, I'm thinking about a time out on the field. I was helping a family with their buffalo, and a young man came up and asked me if I knew where the gallbladder was. And I said, yeah. And I was already in the guts. So, I kind of showed him, oh, this gallbladder sits on the liver right here. And this is how you get it off. And, make sure you don't puncture it because the gall tastes really bad and you don't want it on the liver. And I handed it over to him and he said, oh, thank you so much. And I was like, can I ask what you use the gall for? And he said, this is our first year hunting out here. They were one of the tribes that had just gotten their treaty rights reinstated. So they had never hunted buffalo before. And I mean, their tribes had, obviously, historically, but
Yes.
these folks. And so he said, we were passed down a tradition and a ceremony where we use these different parts. And the last piece we needed was a gallbladder. And so now we're going to be able to take this back home and do our ceremony that we were passed down, that we didn't have the pieces for 150 years or so. And so those kinds of moments, and it's just me having been a butcher, I know where the gallbladder is. And so just being there and that cross-cultural connection and the gifting back and forth, it was just like, it's those kinds of moments that really, really, for me, it's why I do Buffalo Bridge, is to connect like that, because I wasn't passed down a spiritual tradition, right? I wasn't passed down like ritual and ceremony and life way, because my people left our homeland and a lot of those things didn't come with us. And so it's something that I really have a lot of grief about, actually, is not having those spiritual traditions. And I'm not saying that it's not like I'm going to take a gallbladder and go do this ceremony or anything like that. That's not mine. But to just be able to like be of service,
Yeah.
I think, to the folks, the first people here and the indigenous people, be of service to them and to their path and to the things that they are doing with their culture and their land and their skills. I mean, that to me feeds that grief spot that I have, that I don't have a tribe anymore.
Yeah, that's very powerful. You actually spark a question in my mind. You mentioned about your own ancestral kind of history. And I remember actually hearing you mention this in another conversation that you had, that you did at some point. I mean, obviously here in America, you spend a lot of time learning skills and actually learning about the ancestral journey of people who came from here. But you went on your own journey a little as well, did you not? Like, and traveled and kind of tried to seek out some of that ancestral history that you have. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I've been on 2 ancestral pilgrimages. So I went to Sweden. So I'm mostly English, Irish, and Scandinavian.
Okay.
If you can't tell. and so I went to Sweden one year on an ancestral pilgrimage and went to the far north there, to the Sami winter market, which the Sami are the indigenous people up north there who are like, look like me. It's really cool.
Yeah, that must have been interesting.
It was awesome. They just thought I was one of them until I spoke, and then I went to England and the Isle of Man and Ireland a couple years ago, as well as on an ancestral pilgrimage. And both times I was really honing in on skin craft traditions of my ancestors, but also open to like finding the burial graves of my people and that sort of thing. And so I went on this crazy long epic journeys. And the Sami people in the north of Sweden and of Scandinavia, they have a really strong skin craft tradition. It's been unbroken, and they're bark tanning people, and their skin craft is incredible. And so I was able to glean some knowledge from that. And then my trip to England and the Isle of Man and Ireland, um, a lot of our traditions were destroyed a long time ago. And especially something that, like skin that can get decomposed very quickly and eaten by the earth. There's just not a lot of lineage, folk lineage left, right? Like in England, there were the industrialization of bark tanning and oak tanning. There's still some tanneries that have been around for a long time in England, and but they like industrialized their processes, and then that often left folk tanners, like just the peasant villagers, they just stopped tanning, or for whatever reasons. A lot of times it was like colonization, and I know the Romans had a lot to do with the industrialization of tanning practices, which took it away from the common folk, and a lot of the tanning went towards like saddles and shoes and armor and stuff like that. So it was a heartbreaking pilgrimage. And I wasn't that surprised to learn that a lot of our material culture it was really radically changed, and changed so long ago that it's really hard to find the threads. And they're still there though. I mean, I met amazing people. There's two women in England who started a Paleolithic tannery, and they're doing amazing skin craft stuff over there. Though they learned from coming to the United States and actually learning from my friend Katie, who started Buffalo Bridge. So I went all the way to England to like find the tanners of England. And then I was like, oh, you learned from my friend who I live with. Okay. You know what I mean? It's just like a weird world.
Yeah.
And there's other people doing rad things. So it is actually coming back up through the ground, I believe, again.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily that we were passed it down, but there are a lot of people. And in Scotland and in Ireland, I know of people who are doing amazing ancestral reparation work. And so it's very near and dear to my heart. And I often I'll talk to my friends over there and try to understand what they've been finding and how they're repairing and putting back together the pieces of what happened to us when we were colonized, because England, Ireland, the Isle of Man, like we were all colonized at some point, and what happened to our traditional culture when that happened. It's a long and, heartbreaking story, and it's not over yet. So we're really working to revitalize some of these land-based seasonal lifeways.
What's the I mean, you said bark tanning is the kind of predominant techniques that you were learning over there. Is there a significant difference in the product that you get at the end between the brain tanning that you're doing here in America versus bark tanning?
Yeah, definitely. Bark tanning is more, I'm trying to think if I have anything nearby. Bark tanning is going to be more of your kind of what you would think of as like a leather jacket, or like boot leather, saddle leather. It's thicker, more water resistant.
Okay.
Oftentimes, it's just like a thicker leather, whereas brain tan is like a suede.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty different. And I know brain tanning happened a lot in the tribes here on Turtle Island, but brain tanning, oil tanning, and other variations of that type of tanning happened in Europe as well. So it's not just native North American. It's like you can find different tanning traditions all over the world in different pockets. People have been doing this stuff a long time,
Yeah, I guess so. Okay. Well, I've got one little angle to go. I know that we've gone for a long time. Thanks for answering so many questions today.
Yeah.
We've talked about traditional knowledge and heritage in many different places, but I guess now is a little question about the future. And I don't know if you're hopefully you're comfortable talking about it. We can skip this bit otherwise. But I guess like the journey, your historical journey, but like maybe your journey now and where it's going. You told me that you're about to get 20 acres in the Olympic Peninsula as a piece of, I think you said, fully wooded land there. I mean, that's very exciting. What do you hope to create? What do you plan to do with the land?
Yeah, this is a dream come true. Oh my gosh. I feel so blessed to be participating in this 20 acres. And it's with a small group of friends. And so we're just in the very beginning stages of it. I run a folk school where I teach folks. Primarily, I've been focusing on animal slaughter and animal processing, but I teach other things as well. And so this land base will be a place where I can run the school out of, which is going to be so awesome. So animal slaughter classes, but other things like tanning, other ancestral traditions, and off-grid living, and those sorts of like earth-based seasonal life skills is what the school is going to be focused on. So somewhere I'm going to be teaching out of. I'm going to hopefully before winter get my wall tent set up. Okay. So I'll be living off grid again, which is awesome. I had a little interim here since last December to now being in a hard-sided structure, which is not so good for my soul. So I'm going to go back to canvas and live off grid again. I'm so excited. And I think, my friends are visioning a place for folks to gather, and maybe we can start an ancestral skills gathering as well. That's kind of in the works. We're trying to have a place where people who are interested in this sort of thing, in these slip spaces, I guess, these alternative ways of being and thinking, and the alternative ways of clothing yourself, feeding yourself, warming yourself, and keeping yourself housed, where folks who are interested in that can come and learn with us. And so that's the vision as it stands right now. And we got a long ways to go. There's not even a road into this property yet. So we ought to start with a driveway and then, go from there. It's going to be a long process. Oh, and I want a Viking longhouse. I'm saying that to the world right now. This is one of my big visions, is to have a structure on land that is very specific to my ancestral lineage that people can come and gather in, because the ecosystem here is so similar to how it is in England and Ireland. It's like a wet rainforest kind of thing, lots of the same plants. And so, I want a Viking longhouse that I can teach out of. So that's the vision.
Yeah, amazing. I'm gonna have to look up. I'm gonna have to look up what a Viking longhouse looks like.
They're beautiful. Wait till you see them. Oh, it just makes my heart sing.
Amazing. That's so good to hear. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear how everything goes. It sounds like a lot of different jobs ahead of you, but like a really fun. I mean, when it's you're creating something with the people you care about, right? It's going to be an amazing experience. So
that's right.
Yeah. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Well, I guess that's time to kind of wrap things up. Thank you again for sharing your story and answering so many questions that seem to just pop into my mind at random times today. It's a good opportunity, I guess, for if there's, I know you have a website, if there's different places you want to send people who are listening today, if they want to follow you or reach out to you if maybe they have any questions, or if they want to learn from you directly with some of the courses and education that you offer.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, we have a website. The school is called Gathering Ways, and the website is www.gatheringways.com.
Okay.
And you can see the current classes that I have listed there. So that's a good way to get a hold of me. And then also we do have an Instagram page, which is just @gatheringways. And that's a good place to go to get more up to date things. I don't post very often. I'm not on the internet a lot, But I try to do the Instagram thing so people know what I'm offering and where and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I would definitely direct people to those two places. I also have my personal website. If you wanted to like just kind of scope out some things on there, that's www.harmonycronin.squarespace.com.
Okay.
And
I'll put links
yeah,
I'll put links down in the show notes as well.
awesome. Yeah, and just reach out to me. I have a series of slaughter workshops coming up this fall, and we still have spots available, so they're going to fill up fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. And hopefully, I mean, at some point, I'd love to check in the future and hear more stories and hear how you've been getting on with your projects, your many amazing projects that you have going on.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be on this podcast. I appreciate you. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Right, that's another episode in the game bag. There's a theme, I guess. I would love to hear what you think about this one. If you have any thoughts or ideas, then send me a message on Instagram. All the links are down in the show notes there at the bottom. Also, if you liked it, then it would be a great help if you can leave a 5-star review. As I said, that helps the algorithmy things. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one. All the algorithmy things that mean that this podcast grows and gets sent to more people who are going to value the content and enjoy the stories and the information and connect with nature more. That's the dream, anyway. A big thank you again to Harmony for such amazing episodes. We go down all the rabbit holes in that one. You can find her on Instagram if you go to Gathering Ways. She also has a website, which is gatheringways.com. She has her own Squarespace, harmonycronin.squarespace. And also she has a Substack as well. So if you head to theravenscottage.substack.com, you can go there as well. So all the links that I've just said there in very quickly, and probably not completely accurately, if you go down into the show notes, you'll see them all there. Right. There are lots more episodes in the pipeline coming up. I'm excited. Got a lot more amazing guests to talk wow. Right. Okay, we've got a bunch more great episodes in the pipeline. People who are lined up to chat and conversations that are already recorded. So I'm excited to share those with you guys soon. But until then, I am heading off back into the mountains to try and cross paths with a bull elk. So fingers crossed. Don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I've got some good people around me who are giving me some good tips. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And until next time.